Star Wars 7x7 episode 3136. The episode of The Bad Batch that came out earlier this week, Tribe, featured a long-standing situation in Star Wars history. That is the continued animosity between Trandoshans and Wookiees. And so I thought we might take a moment to look at what the deal is with that exactly. So that's what we've got on tap for this deep dive episode. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy. And thank you so much for joining me for it. So, I wish there was a clean answer about exactly why Trandoshans and Wookiees don't get along, and unfortunately it seems there's not, at least with all the stuff documented at Wikipedia and the stuff that I did in research in my own reference library stuff. Like, it's not necessarily clear how things began. One of the things that I saw in the Star Wars Essential Atlas, that wonderful tome from 2008, which I guess technically now should be considered legends in terms of its materials, but there's still a lot of information in there that I think is considered part of the infrastructure canon, if you will, of the Star Wars galaxy, and so a lot of that is still stuff you can rely on. But as far as the history of the Wookiees and the Trandoshans, well, yeah, maybe things are a little sketchy, but the thing I wanted to flag for you from the Essential Atlas is the fact that Wookiees as a species have been known to be very exploratory, and in their own star system, which is actually the Kashyyyk star system — Kashyyyk is also a planet too, confusingly, but there you go — they were expanding out to other planets and other moons within that system, and as the Atlas puts it, planting their flag on these places. And it goes on to say that the Wookiees had an ongoing blood feud with the Trandoshans, but beyond that, we don't necessarily get any details about it. And we don't get any indication that the Wookiees tried to take over Trandosha or tried to conquer the Trandoshans. There is just some kind of feud happening. And yes, Trandosha, the planet where all the Trandoshans are, is also in the Kashyyyk star system too, in case I didn't make that clear at the outset. So yeah, they're all in the same star system and just not getting along for some reason. Now, Star Wars certainly has a tendency to create monocultures, as has been noted by many folks, and most recently in conversations here in the podcast, Chris Kempshall, the author of The Politics and History of Star Wars. So, monoculture being the idea that a species in Star Wars just does one thing. Like, all Toydarians are merchants of some kind, or all Trandoshans are bounty hunters of some kind. But in this particular case, it seems that Star Wars has laid in a framework for Trandoshans that actually sort of creates a monoculture for them. They have a deity who's referred to as the scorekeeper, and apparently your place in the afterlife, according to Trandoshan theology, is based on how many points you score with certain aggressive behaviors in this life. And so they're actually incentivized to do terrible things across the galaxy, which is why some sources say that this is why they become mercenaries or slavers or bounty hunters, because they're basically trying to do more and more awful things so that they get a better and better place in the afterlife. And in line with that, you get more points in their system for killing versus capturing and keeping prisoners. But it also kind of works the other way around, in that it was apparently a very humiliating thing for a Trandoshan to be captured by a Wookiee, for example, because that would erase all of their points accumulated for getting into the afterlife. However, they could get them all back if they were able to escape and kill the person that captured them in the first place. And so, yeah, there's a whole system around this business. And so potentially part of the animosity has to do with the fact that the Wookiees are not necessarily inclined to just kill them outright. They're inclined to capture, like they don't have that necessarily same bloodthirsty nature. And so this is particularly aggravating to Trandoshans. Now, that's one aspect of their whole relationship situation. Another aspect may have to do with just general recognition of Trandoshans as a species of merit in the galaxy. And it seems like they haven't necessarily had that based on the way that the Galactic Republic has considered Trandoshans. So it's been Wookiee representatives in the Galactic Republic, but it's not necessarily clear whether the Wookiee representatives are there for just the Kashyyyk star system or for their entire sector. I'm not necessarily clear on how that works, but what is apparently certain is that because of their more collaborative nature, their more comparatively peaceful and less antagonistic nature, the Wookiees have been more readily represented in the Galactic Republic, and this apparently has not sat well with the Trandoshans, and that may also be a significant reason why the Trandoshans ultimately sided with the Confederacy of Independent Systems during the Clone Wars. Then you get to the endgame of the prequel trilogy, Revenge of the Sith, and there's some suggestion that perhaps the Empire was particularly peeved about Kashyyyk because that's where Yoda was supposed to die and he didn't die, and the Wookiees helped him escape, which then led him to be able to try to go after Palpatine. And I think it's fair to say that the Wookiees were definitely not fans of the Empire and probably were not from the jump. But it also seems like in short order, the Empire decided that they were going to go after the Wookiees and they were going to have the Trandoshans do the dirty work. They were just going to say, hey, you guys hate the Wookiees, go for it. And I say in short order because as we see them deforesting in the Bad Batch, we're still less than a year from the fall of the Republic in Season 2. So yeah, that's what I mean by in short order. And the Trandoshans seem only too happy to do this, at least by the indications that we got in this episode of the Bad Batch, because again, they used to be part of the Confederacy of Independent Systems. So in theory, the Separatists losing the war, they could have decided, okay, this is a bad thing. But no, they actually decided this is a good thing because the Empire seems to be angry with the Wookiees and they're angry with the Wookiees. So it all works out. Not to mention, I think the idea of earning afterlife points probably got a little bit easier under the Galactic Empire for them. So yeah, for a lot of reasons, I think they were into this whole situation. So even though the Atlas describes the Wookiees as carrying on a blood feud against the Trandoshans, it really seems like the Trandoshans are the ones who have every incentive to continue this thing in the first place. I mean, whether it's jealousy about their place in galactic affairs or anger at their nearby planetary folks who are stronger than them, who can rip their arms off, which, I wonder if that's why Trandoshans ultimately have the ability to regrow limbs. If that's just millennia of evolution on their part, considering what happens when Wookiees and Trandoshans get together. I don't know. But the point is that the Trandoshans really seem like they have the motivation to be the aggressors and to continue this blood feud, where the Wookiees don't seemingly have any motivation to continue it of their own devices, right? Not to be proactive about making things bad between their two societies. And as long as the majority of Trandoshans believe in a deity that gives them points for Wookiee pelts, then yeah, I think there's going to be no end to this trouble. So that's what I've got for you about the history of Trandoshans and Wookiees and that conflict. And that's what I've got for you on this episode of the podcast. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always. And may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.